My name is Shannon Dunn, and I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about virtual field trips and some things we've been doing with them at the University of Florida, where I am an instructional designer at the Center for Instructional Technology and Training. I do want to thank my co-presenter who could not be here today because she's really helped me think through a lot of these topics. And to give you a little bit of background about myself, I studied anthropology and art history and was a practicing archaeologist for about a decade before I landed in instructional design. In the process of working in archaeology, you use a lot of resources. You use a lot of sources of data. You're not just in the field all the time. You use aerial photography, you use Google Maps, you use satellite photography. In fact, you might be familiar with the most recent TED Prize winner from 2016, Sarah Parcak, who's called a space archaeologist because she uses satellite imagery of the Earth. She doesn't study space, she studies the Earth, but she does it with satellite imagery, and then she goes and verifies those results in the field. So as I made the transition to becoming an instructional designer, I was talking with faculty at the University of Florida about how they help their students learn about their discipline. And a lot of the time, they're using the same resources that they've been using. They're not really giving them a really formal insight into what it is they're doing as researchers day to day. So I started thinking about how we can get students to have those kind of authentic experiences, even though we can't maybe get them to the places where we really would like to take them. And then also incorporate that into our instruction through authentic assessments. So I have a lot to cover. I'm going to try to get through it pretty quickly because I want to get to kind of the meat of it towards the end. I'm going to go pretty fast through some stuff at the beginning. If I'm going too fast, you can yell at me to slow down. I don't promise that I will, but I'll try. So at the end of the presentation, there's a few things that I would like for you to take away as attendees. I'd like for you to understand at least my conception of authentic assessments and their use in learner-centered courses. I'd like you to know how to locate virtual field trips that are relevant to your disciplinary area or to the disciplines that you're helping people teach. I want you to be prepared to incorporate virtual field trips with authentic assessments into your own instructional practice. Again, whether that is as an instructor yourself or as an instructional designer. So I'm going to go over some basics. I'm going to go over some basics about authentic assessments. I'm going to go over some basics about virtual field trips. We're going to touch briefly on accessibility. That's a huge topic, and I would love to talk to some of you afterwards if you have ideas about how to make some of these resources more accessible. I'm going to share some lessons learned because we've been implementing these at the University of Florida, and we definitely have learned a few things. And I created an example module which is published to Canvas Commons. So you can search for this course, it's a Canvas shell, on Canvas Commons under the same title as this presentation, The Real World is Not Enough. And this slide presentation is in there. There are a few more resources that are built in there that I think might help you if you want to take some of these ideas back with you. If you have a hard time not multitasking, and since most of you have mobile devices with you anyway, you can download the Google Arts and Culture app and play with that. That's got a lot of the virtual field trip resources that I'm going to point people to, and think about how you might incorporate some of those into authentic assessments. So authentic assessments. These are complex, realistic, and representative challenges. They usually are going to go into more detail and dive deeper into a topic than try to cover a lot of things within a topic. They're going to require students to demonstrate and apply knowledge rather than to demonstrate test-taking skill. They're going to combine learning and assessment in an iterative process, and they're going to allow for creativity, both for you as the instructor and for the student in their responses. They're also going to involve some kind of skill development related to your discipline. Students are going to create their own answers, explanations, or solutions. They are not going to select from some predetermined list of responses. You might nudge them, you might point them in a certain direction, but they're not going to answer a multiple choice question. The tasks that you present are going to be real world scenarios. We're not going to segment them significantly or oversimplify them from their context. We really want them to understand the discipline that you're working within. Some of the really great benefits are variety. So variety for you as the instructor in being able to vary your assessments as you develop them, but also for the students, again, in the way that they might be able to answer. You want to make sure that you identify the content skill or value that you're going to be assessing for alignment, and you want to aim for those higher levels of learning. Again, you want to make sure that you define and know what you're assessing before you go in. So some of us don't always work in that direction, but make sure that you know your course goals, your student learning objectives, know which content, skill, and/or value, you might assess more than one thing on these assessments, and what level of learning you're focusing on. Virtual field trips. In looking at the virtual field trip resources that are available or that you can create, we sort of categorize these in two different ways. It seemed like they fell into either a simulated visits bucket or a video tours bucket. The simulated visits are virtual environments that the students can explore. There's some type of navigation that's available to them. They're interactive, and they're usually not linear. You can give them directions to move through them in a specific way if you want to, but they offer a little bit more interactivity and paths for the student. Video tours are not that interactive, and they're linear, but you can create them. You know, almost all of us have video recorders on our phones anymore. It's really easy when we're out in the field, when we're visiting a museum, to take some quick video and share that. But it doesn't allow the students to really feel immersed in that environment. How and when to use virtual field trips. There's a lot of ways that we can use them. You can provide opportunities for your students to practice, and I would encourage you to do so, especially if you are going to incorporate virtual field trips into an assessment. Make sure that students have access to these platforms, have access to the resources, and get to practice with them. You can use them for content delivery, but I would caution against it because it's very possible that in moving around these resources and these environments, your students are not going to get to the specific piece of content or the specific room or the specific image that you wanted them to see. So make sure that if you are going to use them for content delivery, you're very clear about where they should wind up. There is some very clear advantages to virtual field trips. I am not a big fan of flying, I'm not a big fan of boats, and I do not scuba dive. But I have spent hours, I'm a little embarrassed to say, exploring the Great Barrier Reef through Google. The images are beautiful. You can move around within these small areas and specific areas of the reef, but you can also jump to different areas around the reef. You can see the impact of global warming on the reef. I'm not a specialist in coral reefs, but you can start to see, some of the reefs that are dying. So obviously, for places that are distant, that are hard to get to, that are expensive to get to, or that people just might not have the mobility to get to, they're a great resource. You can hike the entire Grand Canyon on the Bright Angel Trail through Google Trek. I mention Google a lot because they have a lot of these resources, but they're not the only people that do. There are some obstacles, and one of those is accessibility. I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So virtual fieldwork can be an option for virtual field trips. So one of the ways that, as an archaeologist, I prepared for going in the field was looking at historic aerial images, modern aerial images. I would look at, and some of the architectural historians that I worked with looked at just the Google Street View to try to identify the resources and the routes that we were going to take to get to places. And again, some of the satellite imagery is really helpful. It can prepare students for what they're going to anticipate, what they're going to experience in the field. If it's going to be tough conditions, they might want to know that it's going to be over 100 degrees and see an example of what that means. And actually, a lot of these virtual field trips show people in those environments. So how are they dressed? How are they prepared to be in that environment? So I mentioned accessibility. And again, I would love to talk to some folks afterward about some ideas you might have. Obviously, virtual field trips are highly visual. So that's one of the big obstacles in using them. A lot of them have audio elements, though not all of them do. And then navigation. So do they allow keyboard navigation? Are they more limited? What ways can you accommodate people with different needs? Try to consider those things in advance so that you're not taken by surprise and that you have some plan, even if you haven't fully implemented it yet. Try to design with universal design in mind. Think about your institutional policy what do you have to do, and then try to go a couple of steps further. Try to work with your DRC or their equivalent and do some brainstorming about how you can anticipate what needs you might encounter. So, based on our experiences in developing and implementing some virtual field trips with authentic assessments in Canvas, we have a few suggestions. Practice. You as the instructor need to be really familiar with the resource that you assign to your students. If they come to you and say that they're having some technical difficulties, which you should anticipate, you need to figure out how you're going to deal with those things, but you also need to know if they say, I can't figure out how to move from one room to another, you should be able to answer that question. Make sure that you incorporate opportunities, again, for your students to practice as well. They shouldn't be just encountering these resources for the first time when they're completing their assessments. Make sure that you scaffold your assessments. I hope everyone's doing this anyway, but with a kind of new resource like this, it's particularly important. So this is going to increase their levels of learning or assist them with increasing those levels of learning, assessment, and performance. It's going to assist with skill development, and it's going to contribute to their confidence, their metacognition, and their success. And again, always try to design with universal design characteristics in mind. So I want to provide a little bit of context for the example module that I created that's in that shell that's on Canvas Commons. It is not an area where I worked. I did not work in ancient Greece. But it's a fun example because it's a controversial example, and I really like controversy. So how many people are familiar with the Parthenon? Okay, so you know that it is in the Acropolis in Greece. It was built in the 5th century BC, so it's pretty old. The entire Acropolis is sometimes considered emblematic of the birth of democracy, certainly of Western civilization. It's built in a classical Greek style. And a very famous sculptor named Phidias is responsible for almost all of the sculptures that were in the Parthenon at one point. Not him physically, of course, but he designed all of these sculptures. He's also considered possibly the person who's responsible for the birth of the classical Greek sculptural style. Since the Parthenon's construction, it served as a treasury, an armory. It was a temple to the goddess Athena. It's been a Christian church, and it's been a Muslim mosque. It's had a long history. In the early 1800s, a British ambassador to Turkey may or may not have received permission to remove a large number of sculptures from the Parthenon. He claimed to have received written permission to do so. That was never confirmed, and those written documents have never been identified, despite archivists going back in history and trying to find those, and even at the time. Even at the time, the removal of these sculptures was controversial. It was debated on the floor of Parliament whether this was an okay thing to do, in part because at the time, Turkey was occupying Greece as part of the Ottoman Empire. So there's also modern debate about whether that was an occupation or whether that was a legitimate government. Beginning in the 1830s, when Greece won its independence, they began to ask for the return or the repatriation of these sculptures. So in that context, it's a very brief overview of, if you were a student in this module, the history that you would get. Let's look at some of the module content. We've developed out a few pieces here in this module, and in the shell that's on Canvas Commons, there's a few explanatory pages in there as well to help you make sense of the pieces that I put in here. But we've got our content page with our readings, our lectures, some videos, and we've got 3 assignments that are scaffolded. We've defined some very specific learning objectives, which are aligned with all of our assessments. And again, on our content page, we've got the items that you would expect to find. In part 1, I just want to make sure that the students are ready. I want to make sure that they're ready to interact with the virtual field trips, get the information out of it that I want them to get out of it. So I designed a discussion. I have them review a debate, a video of a debate that was recorded just a few years ago, so it's pretty recent. There are 2 people speaking in favor of the repatriation of these sculptures and 2 people speaking in favor of the British Museum maintaining ownership. It's a pretty engaging debate, and again, you can go watch it, I've got it linked. And I want to make sure, by having the students post to a discussion, that they understand the points that I want them to understand before they move into the next piece. So I ask them to tell me who they think won the debate, which arguments were most convincing, and then I have them engage in a conversation after that. There's more instruction on the actual discussion page. This is going to ensure the content review and understanding of the material. It's going to support engagement and interaction. It's going to prompt critical thinking and an appreciation for other perspectives, kind of priming them to move into some ethical considerations. And it is also scaffolding to what I'm calling part 3. It's the 3rd assessment. So here's where it gets fun. Again, if you have a mobile device, I have some short URLs for you. I'm going to show you a walkthrough in the next slide, and I've got these URLs also on the next slide. So if you start typing and I move to the next slide, you can still get there. If you want to play with it, the first 2 short URLs go to the Parthenon via a resource called 360 Cities. This is, I categorize it as a virtual field trip, but it's really static. It's a 360 view of one location. The 3rd link is to the British Museum. So in this assessment, we'll just let this play. This is a good cautionary note. So this building that you see is where they land when they follow that link. That's not the Parthenon, even though it's a link to the Parthenon. So we zoom in on it. It looks really fantastic. There's sculptures that are there. But wait, it'll rotate around, and then you'll actually see the Parthenon. So there, again, it's a good reminder that you need to make sure that when you provide these resources to your students, they know how to get to the actual pieces that you want them to interact with. So this is the Parthenon. There's not much left of it anymore. In this 2nd assignment, I asked the students to not only walk through these virtual field trips, which are the same ones that I asked them to interact with in the 3rd assignment. I asked them to let me know immediately if they encounter any technical difficulties, because if they're having any problems, there's a good chance that other students are having the same problem, and we're going to have to figure it out really quickly. I gave them some very specific guiding questions to prompt them to conduct specific evaluations, which again are going to scaffold to part 3. So as you're looking at these, you can think about these questions as well, which include how are or were the marbles displayed? Who has access to these items? How close can someone actually get to these or any other statuary? What curation, preservation, and/or protection is evident? How does the physical space of London's British Museum, and I'll have that for you on the next slide, compare with what you see at the Parthenon? And we'll go ahead and look at the British Museum now. So in this example, too, you can see that you're going to have to give students a very specific instruction path so they get to where you want them to go. Unfortunately, you can't link them directly to land in that room. And as we zoom out, you can see that is the entire Temple of Athena that was removed from the Parthenon, almost wholesale. All of the other sculptures in this area of the British Museum were also removed. So when we get to part 3, I'm asking them to interact with the same virtual environments. They've been there before. I asked them in part 2 to take some screen captures and submit those as examples to make sure that they've gone to the right place, they know how to take a screen capture. They're going to use very specific screen captures in part 3 to support their arguments. So in part 3, I asked them to do a very critical analysis of both of these locations. I'm asking them to respond to 2 specific prompts, and in my example course, I referenced some writing resources and standards that I didn't put into the course, but I hope that you would do. I asked them for a structured essay responding to 2 specific prompts. One, based solely on physical considerations, including access, display, curation, preservation, should the marbles be repatriated? So we're looking specifically at those locations, specifically at the physical aspects of those locations. Explain why, citing lectures, readings, module content, anything external to the course that you happen to know about. Support your arguments with the screenshots of those places. And I asked them if any of these arguments become stronger or weaker if they consider whether these items are artifacts or works of art. Because disciplinarily, depending on what their background is, those interpretations probably are going to be very different. I asked them to reflect on that. I'm really a sucker for any piece of metacognition and reflection I can get students to do, so I try to always incorporate that as well. In the second piece, I asked them to move then from that more objective, not purely objective, but more objective argument to what might be a very subjective argument. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully they can make a strong ethical argument and incorporate some of those physical arguments from above. But a lot of times when we start talking about ethics, we start talking about subjectivity and ideas of statehood and cultural patrimony start playing into those arguments. And it's really important that students work, for me, from those objective pieces, content pieces, to those more potentially controversial pieces. And their arguments then are going to be a lot stronger. So here, too, I asked them to incorporate screen captures. And I asked them to tell me whether, having seen these environments through the virtual field trips, impacted their argument. Because remember, they had to choose who they thought kind of won this debate early on in the module. So I want to know if, having now seen these locations, has changed their perspective. We have some resources to create your own. So this template, I think I tried this. I'm gonna not click out to it. But we have resources for you to create your own through this kind of template. It walks you through a lot of the pieces that I think you'll need for your students to be successful. And again, these are all in that Campus Commons course. You can also access a page that we have on our website at the UF Center for Instructional Technology and Training. We've got additional resources and we've got examples. And now that I am nearly at the end, I am going to try to click on this and see if it'll work. I actually don't have the pointer showing up. Is there a tech person who can help me? Oh. There it is. Okay, so we've created an entire page dedicated to virtual field trips. We have some assignment examples. So if you're interested, I wouldn't recommend taking these wholesale. Obviously, apply them to your course. But they have different examples. And the best part of this page is the additional resources list. It's amazing how many resources there are that have already been built that have these virtual interactive environments that you can send your students to. And I really think that as long as you structure them appropriately and scaffold them appropriately, they can get a lot out of them. And it doesn't just have to be supplementary. It doesn't have to just be pretty pictures or fun. You can really build them into having them understand your discipline in a deeper way through these authentic assessments. And that's all I have. Someone have any questions?
So, the assessments that they did, how were those graded? Were those instructor graded? Or?
Yeah, so the question was the assessments that they did, how were those graded? I just built these. These are not ones that we actually used. So in the Canvas Commons course, I built out some rubrics to go with them. So they would be instructor or TA graded. They would not be probably appropriate for a very large enrollment course. You would need to change them slightly. It's, I'm imagining a much smaller course for this particular set of assignments. Yes?
Are you developing any of your own virtual field trips using like 360 cameras or anything like that?
Okay, so the question is, are we developing any of our own virtual field trips using 360 cameras or anything like that? We are, but not using 360 cameras. We have a fantastic video studio with staff that loves to go on location shoots. So some of the examples on this page link to some of those video examples. We've done some, particularly for our ag folks, we've got dairy facilities and swine facilities and beekeeping and different labs that are not as fun to look at or watch, which I think we might not have posted online, like human remains labs. But we also do person on the street interviews and things like that. So those are very linear. They take you in a very specific direction. In some ways, they're a little bit easier in terms of thinking about accessibility and accommodations, because then you provide the narration and you look at how much is being described by the instructor, and then you provide those audio descriptions as well. It doesn't give the students the same experience, but it's something.
Right.
Yes?
I just want to say I'm working on our first one, our first 360 field trip for our company, so if you want any information from me on it.
Love that. Thank you.
So to repeat, she's working on 360. Talk to her. Any other questions? Yes?
Have you done any, instead of linking externally, have you done any like iframing stuff to like keep it within Canvas shell so people don't have to
Yeah. So the question is, have we done any iframe basically to keep everything within the Canvas shell? And we have not. I think that if you are comfortable with that, that could work fine. We just haven't done it. A lot of these have the option to, one, I want the students to really see where they're going. I don't think students always understand that when it happens within the iframe. And the other piece is I want them to oftentimes really make the image as big as possible. And I think sometimes when they stay within Canvas, they're less likely to do that. But there are good reasons to do it as well. And I think you could definitely play with that. Any other questions? If not, if anyone wants to come talk to me about accommodations and ideas you have, that would be fantastic. I'd love your ideas. Thank you very much.